So let me try and unpack this. So in modern day, I think there can be a lot of problems to arise from this addiction. But let's talk about some extreme cases first, like the far future. Let's say technology continues on a trend of growth, whether it's logarithmic or linear. I think a growth after a few hundred years is still substantial enough that we could have a world where things are so efficient, machines are so efficient, machine learning is so quick, and we've really fine-tuned all of these mechanisms in our world to cover basically all of the necessities of life, then it comes down to, could it be a world where everyone takes their enjoyment and lives their lives in a virtual reality that's more perfected? Wow, machines, automation, and a small population of real people runs the real world, right? The argument's often thrown around that we won't have a use for millions of workers in some of these industries once automation comes in, and that's a very hot topic to debate. And I'm not here to swing you one way or another, or even say which way is the right way. But let's humor the idea that it just becomes economically impractical for companies to have thousands of workers when they could have one server room after we discover some sort of algorithm that allows such an existence. At that point, I don't see how it could be bad for society. You would just have a lot of happy humans in the Matrix, and then they sleep in the real world at night and then wake up and do it all again. What the point of that existence would look like would just become what people have as their goals in this virtual reality, right? Which is satisfying. I don't think it's practical now just because too many industries require real world skill sets and human interaction, but in the far future, like a Wall-E, I find it hard to argue that that's bad. We see it as bad now, right? Because they look fat, they do nothing but sit on their ass all day and look at screens. That's from a modern perspective where that's useless by all means, right? And I'm not here to call fat people out, but being overweight, looking unhealthy, and like I said, I want to stress this real quick. I'm not trying to call people out who are overweight. It's just seen as a less desirable thing biologically. So from our lens now, looking at Wall-E, it looks horrible, but they're kind of living in a utopia in their own little head. And so if the rest of humanity, which in Wall-E that is the rest of humanity on the Ark, I believe is what the ship is called, is happy and content with that, then I can't argue why that isn't the ideal existence. I might get some hopeful people out there saying, well, the purpose of our lives are to explore, to push boundaries. That's completely subjective in my opinion.
My intuition is to think there has to be some other purpose, but the only arguments I've ever developed, just thinking through morality as someone who is not religious, is to think, okay, we must promote the human life or the life of conscious creatures to the max, whether that means individually or utilitarian or a mix of both, a nice balance. That is a morality I've come to find as rational and reasonable. And in that, you could even make objective arguments without a deity, although that takes a little bit more philosophical knowledge than I'm sure I'm capable of currently. But nonetheless, because of that, I'm not sure I could counter your claim that in this future where we no longer need humans to feed the big businesses, that this is a bad thing. I can't counter that because as far as I can tell, if promoting human life, just to say it simply, is the goal, and every human is now happier. If you can afford an existence where it becomes economical to buy this device and the only expense is the expense of your bandwidth, and let's say that's inexpensive, rich people, poor people, you don't need a fancy house, you don't need nice cars, you can just get those in the game. Now, of course, that could be abused with in-game currencies, and then it just becomes a replication of life Industrial Revolution and forward. Then it's its own circular, what if you invent the game in the game?
Exactly.
That's its own conversation. But presuming there's no introduction of economics in it, which you can't really presume, but I'm going to, then who's to say that's a problem?
Right.
If your experience is so real, and we can't conceptualize what it's going to look like, just as Wall-E conceptualized it as TVs in front of overweight people, well, that's not what it would look like now. We now know, okay, it would probably be some kind of headset or something more virtual reality-esque. Or Black Mirror has conceptualized it as chips, and you mentioned Neuralink. We don't even know how amazingly efficient and real it will feel to manipulate our brain. And as soon as you concede that our brain controls our experience, and someone finds out how to manipulate that, I don't know how to argue that it's a bad thing if every single person is happier, as a group, as a collective, and as an individual. I can't even think of a counter-argument outside of monetary influence, which we're just setting aside for the sake of this thought experiment. Can you think of any counter-arguments?
I really cannot, Colton, because this is... we're describing the ideal world, and who wouldn't want to live in the ideal world, right? Now, of course, you brought up the real this is a real problem about the fake world, is economics, right? How are businesses going to capitalize on certain parts of the game? But and as part of a lot of the problems of the real world is that people do that in the real world, not just in the fake. But yeah, let's say this game world, you didn't have to worry about that. It was completely fair. Everyone, has their blank slate in life, and they build it up. And they have these goals they meet. They have these challenges they complete. They compete with friends, and if you die, you just restart. The threat is being set back in time. The threat is no longer losing everything. So, because if you can't die, you can gain everything back. Whenever you die, let's just say you lost everything you have in your name. You'll just work it back up. And because you have memory of the previous life, you already know the skills you need to get there.
And this is even just presuming, unless I understand you incorrectly, that it's a replica of the human experience.
Right, yes.
Who says this new reality is a replica of 21st, 22nd century America? This is just our construct that you and I are saying right now. It might not be anything like that. It could be an imaginative world where physics doesn't have to work the same. You can program physics. There's this argument that most famously is said by Elon Musk that it's not unlikely that we're in a simulation because you can simulate so many universes at once, right? Mm-hmm. It's not unlikely that we're in one of them. Well, in a similar vein, a similar line of thinking, we are just, let's say, in a simulation where physics works a certain way. Quantum mechanics is not intuitive to us, but it works a certain way. In this virtual reality, there is no reason why you couldn't just program it to have a different set of physics.
Exactly.
If your character experiences it as real, it doesn't matter what the experience looks like. And hopefully that doesn't actually divert your train of thought, but I just wanted to clarify that. We're even just assuming this narrow band of human reality as we know it today or in the near future. It might not even be that.
Yeah, a common thing in the games that I play, a fantasy world, right? Where you kill monsters, you get experience and money from them, and you level up, right? Imagine a real world where that was a career path. Everyone would do it if it was just like a video game. Because in a video game, if you die, you restart, and you just continue to kill things. Action-packed. I mean, in a world like that, it would promote aggressive tendencies. I'm not sure how it would translate to other avenues of life, because we're getting into complex, thinking about how a video game world would be realistic. But the possibilities are limitless. And in my opinion, it's kind of scary to think about the real world as being a simulation, because it very much could be. I'm not going to deny that at all. A very complex one, but let's look at the perspective of the characters in the video game, right? By using my fantasy analogy, by their logic, killing monsters is a law of the universe and like a profession that just exists because that's the way it is, you know? Just like gravity makes sense to us and that's just the way it is. So is that way of life.
Right.
And why do you get experience from killing things? Well, that's just how the world
That's
is,
just
right?
what the creator said, to
Yeah.
use
Right.
religious language. The
Uh-huh.
creator of this universe made these rules.
Right.
Is that creator a being? Is it something separate from reality that's only understood metaphysically? Is it a human in a billion years? Sure, some answers may be more likely, and it might be none of the above. But that doesn't matter whenever the game itself, we know, will advance. So if our world is reality or not, that even doesn't matter, I would claim. What matters is what happens to these artificial worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, killing the monster is just part of the game. Well, if your whole existence now, let's say human existence, is every time you wake up, you start a new game. Of course, you'd have to have practical things like some kind of sustenance feeding to your physical body and all of these things. But every time you die, like you said, you restart. Or it could be more expansive than that. Every time you die, you can choose to restart, or you can choose a different reality, a different set of rules, a different set of physics.
That's
One reality doesn't have any kind of policing. One reality doesn't have any kind of economics. And obviously that could be abused for things most people would say are immoral. And it could be abused for things that people see as of the least importance. Just living your life, or not, but you're existing and you're enjoying yourself.